Wow, I love the fact that you. What happened?
I mean, these are just,
Wow.
they're first of all too cool for me to wear. Anybody who knows me knows I can never pull this off.
Yeah, we should get married.
We should. This is the beginning of So it's a privilege and great to have you here. You seem like a bit of a regular in DC now. Maybe not as much as the Daily Show days, but
Yeah.
I think you were just at the White House recently.
I was just at the White House. Yeah. Just throw that out there. I was just hanging out with the president, and it was funny though. The first lady, I mean not the first lady, the vice president. I went to some event, the AAPI event.
You were honored.
That's right, I was honored there. Sorry, I got an award actually at this event.
We're not giving you one here today, though.
Right? No,
just to manage expectations.
I'm not getting one
today.
today. Okay. I went and they were like, "You're going to meet Kamala Harris," and I was very excited because I thought, because I campaigned for her, and so then there was like a receiving line, and she was there. And in front of me was Daniel Day Kim, the Asian actor from Hawaii Five-0, other things. And so Kamala meets him, and she's like, "Oh my God, I'm such a big fan. The work you're doing is unbelievable. Hi." And my wife and I are standing there, and I'm like, all my years on the Daily Show, I'm like, she must know. She's gonna know. Like, we're gonna have something to talk about. Like, we better come up with some talking points. And we're like, we have nothing to talk about. Anyway, I get up there after she's spoken to Daniel Day Kim for like 30 minutes. And I get up there and she's like, "Oh, Aasif, nice to meet you. Would you stand right here?" And I was like, whoa. And it literally, she acted like I had dated her and broken up with her at some point. She was just like, okay, all right, okay.
It's a little evil.
It was a little bit, yeah. Anyway.
Amazing. Yeah. Well, look, I mean, everybody remembers all the amazing stuff you did at the Daily Show and what you've done today. And you've used comedy, but also pop culture to kind of get out of your comfort zone and raise awareness to issues.
Yeah.
How do you think of the role of pop culture in shifting perceptions and maybe highlighting and influencing issues you care about or are topical to the day?
I think that we are. When you say pop culture, I think what you're talking about is television, film, music, stuff like that. And I think that, at the end of the day, we are creatures of storytelling, and stories actually allow us to engage with incredibly complex topics and sort of engage with them, but also deal with our own emotions around it and stuff, and often stories are an easier way to do that. Like we know from like the last several years now that facts don't really make any difference to people. Like it doesn't feel like you can tell people a whole bunch of facts. I mean, we know with immigration, we know with pandemic, we know with anything you bring up. If you just tell people a whole bunch of facts, actually, scientifically, you can't get COVID by licking a table. Well, I don't know, but stories are the only thing that I think. I am a storyteller. That's what I do. So, for me, it is about telling and look, Trump told a great story, and a lot of people bought it, and that's how he got elected. He didn't. None of it was based in any truth. Yeah. It was just a great story, and so we really want stories because the stories move us and they affect us emotionally. Facts we dismiss, and we go, you can't actually change people, and that's been proven now that we can't change people's minds using facts. We have to tell them a better story than the story they tell themselves, and that's really what's going to change the culture.
So take us back when you were young, when you were growing up in the UK. I mean, so much of your exposure, we chatted a little bit about, was things coming out of the United States from film, media, television. It was really like the soft power of the United States, kind of the storytelling in Hollywood and TV, right? Like, what was that impact? What was your kind of impression of the United States living overseas, and then
Well, I was a little kid growing up in the north of England, in the 70s. And I just thought America was like an episode of Flipper, and so, you guys remember that show?
Yeah.
Everybody's too young. I thought it was just cop shows and you know and Dallas, you know what I mean, and that's what I thought America was, and that is the story that America told about itself for a long time and continues to tell about itself. You know, the story of like, we are the greatest nation in the world, we are the greatest democracy the world has ever known, and you know, blah, 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 and all this stuff. And none of it is true. It's clearly not true. We're not the greatest country in the world. We're like 35th in education. You know what I mean? Like, we're the most violent country in the world.
Are these the
Like, you know what I
facts
mean?
you're referring to? I mean,
Yeah, these are facts. You know what I mean? Like, we're not the greatest country in the world. We're not even close to the greatest country in the world. I think the greatest country in the world might be like Iceland or something. I don't know. You know, but it's like, but that's the story that America told and continues to tell, and that's what we need to hear. And it's a great story. It makes us feel good about ourselves. It makes us feel like we can accomplish things, and it's the story that the rest of the world was told. And America had the best PR sort of mechanism in the world, which was Hollywood, you know? And Hollywood was exporting all kinds of incredible movies and television. And everybody in the world watched, even my cousins in India, you know, watched they watched Bollywood movies mostly, but they, you know, they did watch Hollywood movies. And so when, you know, everybody sort of, what it did was create an investment in this country being the thing that it says it is. And over the last 20, 30 years, we've realized, like, maybe we're not the thing that we've been saying. You know, since World War II, the end of World War II is when we started this campaign of like, we're the greatest country in the world. And now we're at that place where most of the world is like, yeah, I think that was bullshit. I think you guys are selling us a lot of bullshit for a long time.
So of everything you've done, right, I think being a writer is probably one of the most impactful areas where you can kind of help shape that narrative about what America really is for so many people whose story maybe hasn't been told, right? Well, so talk a little bit about that, the diversity in Hollywood and film, in the diversification of access to content with TikTok stars and so on.
I mean, look, Hollywood has been and it's where I've worked for a long time now, and you know, it's been a great place if you're a white guy, you know, and it's been a lot of money, a lot of, you know, all your stories are being told, like, you know, we really care about what happens to white men in Hollywood, you know, it's like, and now what we are seeing is a movement towards diversity, and I hate that word, but you know what I mean, like more of an inclusive sort of storytelling, because the story of America is not just about what happens to white people, and you know, and now we're seeing more stories of LGBTs and people of color and Asians and African Americans, and you know, and it's important that we tell those stories, because like I said, it changes culture, and it you know, Will and Grace is the perfect example of how that happened, and you can sort of follow the emergence of Will and Grace to like gay people being allowed to get married. You know, you can sort of track that, right? You know, and I think that it is really, really important to tell these stories, and I often, you know, have conversations with people, and I've worked in writers' rooms and stuff, you know, and it's like diversity and inclusiveness is important for its own sake. It's not like you always hear, like, you know, well, we tried to find a woman in the writer's room, but there's just nobody that was qualified enough, you know? Yeah. And I always say, like in creative stuff like comedy and whatever, like white guys think other white guys are really funny. And you know, they think people, and we do, we think people who look like us and sort of like us are really interesting and really funny, because it's a narcissistic experience, you know? You know, I was running a writer's room with my wife a couple of years ago, which I don't recommend anybody ever do. With my wife specifically. No, just with their spouse. Don't ever like run a writer's room with your spouse. And you know, there was a whole thing where it was like a bunch of guys and then my wife, and we would get into these arguments at home about like how the classic sort of, you know, I said this thing, and then the guy who's the intern said it 5 minutes later, and you guys were all like, "Oh, that's brilliant, Jeff. That's great," you know. And he's like, getting like $8 an hour to like type things up. And so we had that conversation, but then there was we were doing this whole piece that I had, it was a pilot for Apple, and it was about Confederate statues. And we had this, and there were no black people in the writer's room. And so we brought in this woman. It sounds horrible, but my wife was like, we have to have an African-American person here to help us write this episode. So we brought in this black woman who is a comedian. She's very successful. She's very talented. And she came in, and she didn't want to be in the writer's room, but she was like, I'll come in and I'll basically hang out with you guys for a day so you can, it was almost like, what are we doing here? Like, are we, and the perspective that she offered, and it sounds awful because it makes me sound like a complete moron, but like the perspective that she offered, all these guys, and they were all, by the way, white men mostly. There were a couple of Indian guys, and suddenly it was like, we were like, oh my God, we would never have thought of that on our own. Like, we wouldn't have come up with that perspective. And so there is a value in just having people who have a completely different world experience and perspective to help shape these stories, to help tell these stories in an authentic way. When I was, in 2014, I was on a show called The Brink for HBO with Jack Black and Tim Robbins, and it was a great show, and it was really well done. But I remember they had this actor that he was supposed to be speaking Urdu, which is Pakistan's language. They were Pakistani soldiers. And they hired this Persian guy, Iranian guy, who doesn't speak Urdu. And the guy literally in the take was speaking just gibberish. And we had a white director who was like, okay, cut, great, let's check the gate. I think we can move on. And I was like, wait a minute, whoa. He was supposed to say something and he just spoke gibberish. Like he just went, because he didn't learn the line. He didn't know how to speak Urdu. So he spoke Farsi, so he sort of went, and they were like, and I remember they looked at me and they were like, it's fine, nobody knows Urdu, so it doesn't matter. And nobody's gonna catch it. And what they were saying was that, like, the white people in Indiana don't care if it's this guy speaking gibberish or Urdu. It's all the same to them. So, but now, I think with the emergence of the streamers and the global sort of community, we don't have that as much anymore. And I think there is more focus on, we're realizing now that there's a billion brown people out there who pay for Netflix subscriptions, and those people do speak Urdu,
Yeah. So talk a little bit about what you see playing out in the next 5-10 years in terms of content creation. The barrier to creating content seems lower, right? TikTok stars, Instagram, social media. I mean, what's that impact going to be on Hollywood and establishment media in terms of just moving the needle in the stories that are being told and who's absorbing content and so on?
Well, I think it's all become very, very sort of democratized now in a way that, like, there's a downside to that too, because now, like, you can be a TikTok star and get like your own TV show. And you may not have more than 30 seconds of content to really talk about, And so it sort of now feels like, I mean, look, who cares what I'm a dinosaur, I'm 50 something years old. So like there's 20-year-olds creating TikTok content that is billions of people are watching, a cat on a skateboard and great, that cat should have an NBC development deal, But the fact, and maybe it does, but you do see, the good thing about it is that it's like everybody has a voice. The bad thing about it is everybody has a voice, And so we have to also manage that in a way from a creative standpoint. But it's great that what we are seeing, and you just follow the money, right? Like what we are seeing now is that the people who hold who are the gatekeepers as to what we get to watch and what we don't get to watch are seeing the financial upside to telling stories about people who are not just not just playing to like Mr. and Mrs. America in Indiana, So I think that's good, and I think that's and it's creating more content. There's definitely more content today and more diversified and interesting content than there has ever been. And that has to be ultimately good, even though there's a definite downside to it, you know.
Well, as we close out, you know, we're here in Washington. You know, people I think like to keep Hollywood in Hollywood, Washington in Washington, New York in New York, right? How do you think about your role, your voice, the impact you want to have on policies and decisions? And, you know, you've been very vocal on social media about gun violence and about coming and being a more forceful advocate and using your own platform. You know, what role do you think you should stay separate?
Well, I mean, I think
how are you looking at what?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that Matthew McConaughey was here yesterday, and he was talking at the White House about guns, and you know, he has a very specific platform in this particular moment because he's from Uvalde, and so, but he also has a huge following and a lot of people who are listening to him, you know, as a big movie star. So, like, to be able to use that platform in that way, I think is incredibly important and powerful. And you know, there's always going to be people who go like, well, why don't you just stick to making movies, pal? You know, and that's okay. You know, you just say like, why don't you just stick to, you know, being whatever you do and get off of Twitter? You know what I mean? Like, and so, but he has the platform, and I think that's important. And I think also just the idea of, going back to the idea of diversity for diversity's sake, or include that, it applies to Washington as well. You know, it is. There's a lot of old white men that run this town. You know, and so anyway,
Well, Aasif, thank you for being here. Thank you for making the trip down. We're grateful for all the stories and content you've created over time, and excited, even though you're a bit of a dinosaur now, what stories are to come yet. So thank you so much on behalf of the Social Innovation Summit and Landmark Ventures. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thanks.